as a individual raised in a union household, held 2 union cards by the time I graduated from college. Been very sympathetic with teachers' unions and so on during school reform debates and all that. Police unions have been part of the problem. I think there's a role for public service unions, but in this case, I feel like it has been a drag, a significant drag on change. I do think that having cell phone documented evidence of some of the malpractices is going to help create a larger constituency for these kinds of changes. But we still have to get them past the police unions. And I don't have a good answer there other than hopefully over time, more progressive individuals will work their way up through the police ranks to captains and to heads of police unions, so that the change that large majority of police recognize most of these changes need to occur. But to actually put it into practice, you're going to have to get past the built-in structural resistance. And unfortunately, I believe police unions are part of that.
Yeah, what he said. But I think what's also instructive here, right, is, we can't ignore the role of race in all of this, right? And in particular, the role of white supremacy, in the ways in which systems and structures, the ways in which institutions of our society, I would say, right, have conformed themselves to accommodate white supremacy, right? And so policing is policing is not an exception to the rule in that regard. And so what that then means, right, is that there are reforms that I think certainly should happen. But we're also seeing the limits of those reforms. When people say this is an issue of training, the cop who shot Richard Brooks in Atlanta, he had just received 9 hours of de-escalation training. It's also come out that this same cop had 12 misconduct complaints. So for me, this is a convergence of issues, right? The bureaucracy is such that clearly you can almost literally get away with murder, right? When it comes to the ways in which Black and brown people, poor people are treated by the cops, right? You just get passes upon passes upon passes. I can't imagine a scenario where, if Officer Friendly had beaten up, a half dozen suburban white kids, that he would get to stay on the force, right? So what do you do to reform an institution that is deeply impacted by racism, right? That's deeply impacted by white supremacy, right? How do you reform a system where people can get all this reform training until they're blue in the face, but when they are confronted with Black and brown people, they simply turn the reform training off, right? One of the police departments that is one of the leaders in progressive police reform training is the police department in Minneapolis, Minnesota. They're a national model for police reform, right? And they're also leading the nation in instances where their police officers have murdered people, unarmed people on camera. Should we confront the power of the police unions and the infrastructure that protects racist or bad cops? Absolutely. The cops have to maintain, or it's in their interest to maintain good relationships with the district attorneys, right? And the DA's office needs to maintain good relationships with the cops. If you're a DA that's not seen as a team player by the cops, and you need cops to come in and testify for the cases that you're trying to get put away, that becomes a little more difficult for you. So then what that means then is that you become more and more lenient, right, when it comes to issues of police abuse, when it comes to issues of police harassment or police brutality. That's the last case they want to bring, right? It literally takes video. It's no coincidence that these are the only types of cases where we see DAs, right, actively and explicitly pushing for convictions. So should there be reform? Yes, there should. But there should also be, we also have to have a real serious conversation, right, about the racial disparities we see when it comes to policing, right? The guy who murdered 9 people in a church in Charleston, South Carolina, got apprehended and got a burger from Burger King. How'd that happen?